This is Reality Dispatch, written by Jim Mins.
The orders were to move the line forward and grenade out the foxhole by any means necessary. The captain was holding up the instruction as long as he could. He attempted to maintain a vigilant face so as not to draw suspicion from the privates under his command. He welcomed the machine gun fire when it pierced their stronghold, as it provided an alibi against what he was attempting to achieve. Defection. "What are our orders, Captain?" came a particularly belligerent private on the morning of the ambush. "We are to move forward when safe to do so. We shell out the foxhole with grenades and cover fire. But I'm not risking it until the enemy fire has died down completely," he explained. "But sir, it's been quiet for an hour or so now." "I'm sure we can make a move," the private queried. The captain peered out from behind the wall that was once a community bank. Its stone facade provided a satisfactory boundary between him and his men, and the bullets that had pierced enough of the outer walls that they looked like fixtures. The captain continued his act with the aid of binoculars to assess the foxhole. "How many men do we estimate?" he asked the private, already knowing the answer to be upwards of 25. "We think 20 or 30, sir. Between us and the locals, we think we have them surrounded, and it should be us who smokes them out now so that we can advance on the next plane, which is vital to the mission," the private relayed in a condescending voice. The captain was wary of his tone. There were already whispers of soldiers who had defected to the enemy lines in the hope of escaping the regime that domineered their lives for their entire duration up until that point. The captain was very aware of his newfound freedom standing amongst the rubble of this foreign land that his supreme leader had orchestrated for them to attend and be a part of the war effort. Looking at the buildings that lay in wreck amongst burnt-out cars and seared corpses, the locals probably thought of them as hell. The captain thought of it as heaven. "What are we waiting for, sir?" the private demanded. The boom took them all by surprise, especially as it was delivered in their language, which was far more unexpected. "Soldiers of the supreme leader, lay down your arms. You do not belong in this war, but you are more than welcome in our country. Put your weapons down and take your boots off. Hold one boot up in each hand and walk towards us. This is the signal we will use to know that you want to be free from your imprisonment. Leave your weapons and walk towards us with one shoe in each hand. We will give you 1 hour to comply. We have already welcomed many thousands of your comrades. They have helped us craft this message for you. Join us. Be free. Be welcome. Defect to us." There is no judgment here, only respect. The message played on a loop on 2 enormous speakers that had been erected from beneath the foxholes that had a series of burnt-out automobiles in front. The captain was taken unawares. He didn't realize there was a second enemy compound beneath the surface on the other end of town, and he instantly relished the thought of utilizing this piece of intel to justify his stifling advance. "That's what I'm worried about!" he yelled at the private. "Did you see there was a second foxhole on the ridge over there? Who knows how many soldiers are inside? Don't rush me, private. I will have you court-martialed faster than you can count to 5. The private stood back with one hand raised in defeat and his weapon helped by its barrel in the other. "Stand at attention, private!" the captain yelled. The private smirked. He dropped his weapon and knelt down and began to unfasten his laces. The captain looked at his company to see the others were all engaged in mid-loosening of their bootlaces. Those that had completed had already mounted the footwear to each hand. They looked at one another in hopeful anticipation. When all the laces were unfastened, not one soldier was prepared to engage in further gunfire. "Defection is punishable by death," the captain yelled, incredulous that his own plans had been thwarted by these underlings. "Captain, you are an enabler of an evil regime, and we have waited our entire lives for this moment. You can either shoot us or set us free. Either way, we are walking." The soldiers began marching away from their position with their hands raised above their heads and their boots dangling from their wrists. The captain looked down at the stockpile of weapons that surrounded the stronghold. He turned his head behind the stone wall to watch his former men arrive at the foxhole. He looked on as they entered one by one, seemingly unharmed. There was plenty of opportunity to execute them on the long walk up the main street to their final arrival. The enemy did not. He chuckled at the ease with which their freedom was afforded. He was 42 years old and had never tasted what his men were now all thriving in. He looked at the stronghold one more time and recognized his own death sentence awaiting him at the allowance of his company to defect en masse. He wondered what the privates would say about him and his reputation within the ranks of the foreign military, and whether he would suffer punishment. not being able to craft his own narrative to the citizens that would embrace his arrival in their free society. His reputation would be tainted by the soldiers who despised him and his leadership style. They already accused him of being an enabler. What would they be saying to the foreigners right now while he sat there awaiting their gunfire? He dropped his weapon and knelt to unlace his boots. The recording continued on the loop. This gave him hope that the offer was still active. He got one boot off and quickly began unlacing the second. By the time it came off, the captain stood with the boots over his wrists. He raised them above his head when the audio ceased, creating an eerie silence that fell over the main street. All that could be heard was the wind on the distant plain. The hopeful anticipation in his heart vanished. He took a step out from behind the bank and felt the whistling breeze of sharp stone fragments break away from the wall as the bullet penetrated the outer sandstone block a millimeter from his forehead. He ducked back behind the wall to regain his previous position.
For more stories of fact-based fiction, head to jimmins.substack.com.